We teach history as a straight line climbing upward, Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age. To us, standing at the peak, looking back at our primitive ancestors with affectionate condescension. But 5 discoveries have shattered that comfortable story. They suggest something else entirely, that ancient humans reached heights of knowledge we're only now climbing back toward, that entire civilizations possessed sophisticated understanding that simply vanished, leaving behind objects that mock our assumptions about progress. Each of these artifacts represents a different impossibility. One defies engineering logic, another manipulates matter at the nanoscale. A third demonstrates precision planning without the ability to see what was being planned. The fourth is a computer made 2,000 years before computers. And the last one proves that 36,000 years ago, humans were already us, thinking symbolically, creating beauty, teaching their children art in flickering firelight. Let me show you why these 5 discoveries changed everything we thought we knew about the past. The fortress of Saqsaywaman rises above the ancient Inca capital of Cusco, Peru, at 12,000 feet above sea level. When Spanish conquistadors first saw it in 1536, they assumed it was a military fortification. Modern archaeological analysis reveals that what they called a fortress was actually just the foundation of something much larger, a massive complex that the Spanish systematically demolished over the following centuries, using the stones to build their colonial churches and mansions. But they couldn't move all of it. The stones they left behind are the ones that defeated them. The largest block in Saqsaywaman's remaining walls weighs approximately 200 tons. That's heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 757 aircraft. And it sits at an altitude where the thin air makes modern construction equipment struggle to function properly. These stones fit together with a precision that seems to violate the laws of ancient construction. You cannot slide a credit card between them, not a sheet of paper. In some places, not even a razor blade. No mortar binds them, just stone against stone, edges meeting in joints that incorporate 12 or more angles, each face of the polygon matching perfectly to its neighbor. And they've stayed that way through centuries of earthquakes that reduced Spanish colonial buildings to rubble. The stone itself is andesite, a volcanic rock with a hardness rating of 6.5 on the Mohs scale. The Inca worked primarily with bronze tools, which rate around 3.5. In practical terms, that's like trying to carve granite with copper wire. It shouldn't work. The tool should fail before the stone yields. In 1997, a team of engineers from Osaka University in Japan decided to test whether modern technology could recreate just one section of Saqsaywaman's walls. They brought computer modeling software, diamond-tipped cutting tools, and laser guidance systems. They attempted to cut and fit stones using every advantage of 21st century engineering. The result? An approximate fit with gaps of 3 millimeters between stones. The Inca original, made with bronze tools and no written mathematical system we've ever discovered, has gaps of less than half a millimeter. The Japanese team's final report included a sentence that appears in various forms throughout the archaeological literature on Saqsaywaman. We still don't know how they did it, but there's a darker detail that often gets overlooked. A Spanish chronicle from 1540 describes the transportation of a single large stone to a construction site. The author, a priest named Pedro Chiesa de Leon, writes that the task required 20,000 men working for 3 months. The stone fell during the final approach, and thousands of workers were lost. And Saqsaywaman contains thousands of these massive blocks, transported across mountain valleys, shaped to impossible tolerances, and fitted together in earthquake-proof walls that have stood for 600 years. Now shift your attention from the mountains of Peru to the deserts along the coast. In 1941, an American historian named Paul Kosok was flying a small aircraft over the Palpa region when something caught his eye. lines in the desert below. Not natural formations, too straight, too deliberate. He asked the pilot to circle back. What he saw was a bird made of lines, 1,000 feet across, geometrically perfect, completely invisible from the ground. The Nazca Lines sprawl across 200 square miles of Peruvian desert. Over 800 straight lines, some running unbroken for 30 miles. 300 geometric shapes, spirals, trapezoids, triangles. 70 designs depicting animals and plants. The hummingbird stretches 300 feet long. The monkey's tail spirals in a perfect logarithmic curve. The spider is rendered with anatomical accuracy, including a detail visible only in one rare species, an extended organ used in reproduction. The Nazca people created these geoglyphs between 500 BCE by removing 6 to 8 inches of reddish pebbles from the desert floor, exposing the lighter colored clay beneath. The dry, windless climate preserved them for 2 millennia. But preservation isn't the mystery. Precision is. Modern surveys of the geoglyphs reveal engineering accuracy that seems impossible for a culture working without aerial perspective. The fisherman figure includes a perfectly straight line deviating less than 2 meters over a distance of 2 kilometers. That's more accurate than many modern roads. To create these designs, the Nazca had to scale up smaller drawings across hundreds of feet of uneven desert terrain, maintaining perfect proportions despite hills and valleys. That requires understanding coordinate geometry and proportional mathematics. The Nazca had no written number system that we've ever found. German mathematician Maria Rieke spent 40 years studying the lines, living in a small house near the desert, taking measurements, documenting patterns. Before she died in 1998, she made a statement that captures the essential strangeness of Nazca. They were meant to be seen by the gods, or by minds capable of conceiving what they couldn't see. The figures are fully visible only from 1,500 feet or higher. The Nazca culture shows no evidence of balloon technology or any means of achieving sustained flight. Yet, they invested enormous labor, decades of work, creating art that they themselves could never properly view. The best explanation archaeology currently offers is that they were created for ritual walking, meant to be experienced from within rather than viewed from above. But that doesn't explain the precision. It doesn't explain why you'd need geometrically perfect spirals and logarithmic curves for a walking path. It doesn't explain why someone would create beauty that only a bird could appreciate. Across the Atlantic, in the basement archives of the British Museum, sits a cup that changes color. The Lycurgus Cup is a chalice made of dichroic glass in the 4th century CE. Under normal light, it glows an opaque jade green. The carved scene on its surface depicts King Lycurgus of Thrace, who insulted the god Dionysus and was punished. But hold the cup up to a light source in a darkened room, and something impossible happens. It transforms to deep, blood red. The green glass shifts to crimson, as if the mythological scene carved into its surface is filling with color. The entire cup glows with internal light, translucent and luminous. The British Museum acquired the Lycurgus Cup in 1958. For 32 years, it was displayed as an unusual example of Roman glasswork, its color-changing property noted but unexplained. In 1990, researchers obtained permission to analyze tiny fragments under scanning electron microscopes. What they found shouldn't exist in a 4th century Roman artifact: nanoparticles. Colloidal gold and silver, ground to particles averaging 50 nanometers in diameter. That's about 1/1000th the width of a human hair. At that scale, these particles interact with light wavelengths in unusual ways. When light reflects off the surface, the gold particles absorb and scatter wavelengths in the green spectrum. When light passes through the glass from behind, the same particles interact with longer wavelengths, producing the deep red glow. Modern recreation of dichroic glass required electron microscopes, precision milling equipment, and knowledge of quantum physics. The Romans made it 1700 years ago with techniques that left no written record, no other examples, no chain of knowledge. Only one other piece of Roman dichroic glass has ever been discovered, a single fragment found in Germany. In the entire Roman Empire, across 5 centuries of glassmaking, across millions of glass artifacts excavated from archaeological sites throughout Europe and the Mediterranean, we have found exactly 2 pieces of dichroic glass, back to that corroded lump of bronze from the beginning of our story, the Antikythera Mechanism. In 1900, Greek sponge divers took shelter from a storm near the tiny island of Antikythera, between Crete and mainland Greece. While waiting out the weather, a diver named Elias Stadiatis descended to explore the sea floor and found a Roman shipwreck dating to approximately 60 BCE. The wreck was a treasure ship carrying marble statues, bronze sculptures, luxury glassware, and amphorae full of wine. Among the artifacts, half buried in the sand, was a corroded lump about the size of a shoebox. Back in Athens, conservators were cleaning and cataloging the finds when the lump split open. Inside were gears, bronze gears, green with corrosion, but clearly manufactured with deliberate precision. For 50 years, mainstream archaeology didn't know what to do with it. The device was too sophisticated for the ancient Greeks, but that explanation required ignoring the fact that every other artifact in the wreck dated consistently to the 1st century BCE, and that the Antikythera Mechanism's bronze corrosion had fused it to objects definitely from the original shipwreck. In 1951, Derek de Sala Price, a physicist and historian at Yale University, began serious study of the mechanism. His conclusion, published in 1974 after decades of research, it appears to be more complex than any known clockwork until the Renaissance. The Antikythera Mechanism contains at least 37 bronze gears, possibly as many as 72 in its complete form. The gears are arranged in a system that predicts the positions of the Sun, Moon, and 5 known planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. It calculates solar and lunar eclipses using the 19-year Metonic cycle. It tracks the irregular orbit of the Moon using a pin and slot mechanism that accounts for lunar orbital eccentricity, and it includes a differential gear. A differential gear is a device that takes 2 inputs and produces an output equal to their mathematical difference. Modern cars use differentials to allow wheels to rotate at different speeds during turns. The Antikythera Mechanism used a differential to calculate synodic planetary cycles, the apparent motion of planets as viewed from Earth. Until the discovery of the Antikythera Mechanism, historians believed the differential gear was invented by a French watchmaker in 1828. This device is from 100 BCE. The mechanism is inscribed with thousands of Greek letters, painstakingly engraved on both the external bronze plates and the internal components. Modern imaging has recovered about 95% of the text. It's not poetry, it's not philosophy. It's technical documentation, a user manual. One section reads like assembly instructions. Another describes the astronomical theory behind the calculations. There are labels for the gears, technical terminology we're still translating. And the inscriptions reference other mechanisms, plural. This wasn't unique. It wasn't even necessarily the most sophisticated version. It was simply the only one that survived, preserved by accident at the bottom of the Mediterranean for 2,000 years. Where are the others? Where are the simpler prototypes that must have preceded this complexity? Where are the improved versions that should have followed? The knowledge vanished. Greek mechanical computation disappeared so completely that, when medieval Europeans began building astronomical clocks in the 14th century, they had to reinvent everything from scratch. In 1879, an amateur archaeologist named Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola was exploring caves near his home in Santillana del Mar, northern Spain. He'd been digging in Altamira cave for a few years, finding stone tools and animal bones in the deposits near the entrance. In November of that year, he brought his 8-year-old daughter, Maria, with him. While her father dug in the dirt, Maria wandered deeper into the cave, carrying a lamp. Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola looked up at the ceiling of the cave and saw something that would destroy his reputation. Bison painted in red and black, rendered with anatomical accuracy, shading, and dimensional perspective. Some were standing, some were lying down, some were painted to incorporate the natural bulges and contours of the limestone ceiling, creating a three-dimensional effect that made them seem to move in the flickering lamplight. He knew immediately they were ancient. The cave entrance had been blocked by a rockfall in prehistoric times, only recently cleared. The paintings were pristine, untouched since the moment the ancient artists set down their tools. Marcelino published his findings in 1880. The scientific community's response was immediate and brutal. Prehistoric humans were primitives, barely capable of language, living in a desperate struggle for survival. The idea that they could create art showing this level of sophistication was absurd. The paintings were obvious frauderies, probably created by a French artist Marcelino had hosted at his home a few years earlier. He was accused of hiring someone to paint the ceiling, of lying about the rockfall, of perpetrating a fraud for personal fame. Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola died in 1888, his reputation in ruins. In 1895, other caves were discovered in France with similar paintings, then more in Spain. Crucially, several were sealed by rockfalls that had clearly been in place for millennia, making modern forgery impossible. In 1902, the same archaeologists who had denounced Marcelino admitted they'd been wrong. His daughter Maria lived long enough to see her father vindicated, but he never knew. The bison of Altamira were painted approximately 36,000 years ago. Carbon dating of the pigments confirms it. The artists used multiple colors: red and yellow ochre, charcoal, manganese oxide. They mixed the pigments with animal fat to create paint. In some areas, they applied color by blowing pigment through hollow bone tubes, creating a spray effect. They used brushes made from animal hair or plant fibers, and they understood perspective. The bison overlap. Closer animals are painted larger. Distant animals are smaller and less detailed. The artists positioned the paintings to use natural rock formations. A bulge in the ceiling becomes a bison's muscular shoulder. A crack becomes a defining line. In flickering torchlight, the animals seem to breathe. This isn't instinctive behavior. It's not survival skills. It's symbolic thinking, abstract representation, aesthetic choice, and technical mastery developed through years of practice and teaching. The Paleolithic artists who painted Altamira were anatomically identical to us. Same brain size, same cognitive capacity. They lived 36,000 years ago, which sounds impossibly distant until you contextualize it against other achievements. Agriculture doesn't appear in the archaeological record until around 10,000 BCE. That's 26,000 years after the Altamira paintings. Written language emerges around 3,200 BCE in Mesopotamia, 33,000 years after Altamira. The artists who painted those bison lived closer in time to the construction of Saqsaywaman than they did to the earliest farmers. They were painting caves while woolly mammoths still roamed Europe, and they were teaching their children art. History isn't a ladder we're climbing. It's a cycle we keep repeating, reaching upward, grasping knowledge, building impossible things, then losing it all and starting over. To ask the same questions that have haunted researchers for decades. How did they do it? And what else have we forgotten?